This is where Waterloo Region comes to talk. Welcome to the Eric Drost Show on 570 News with your host, Eric Drost. Simulcast on Rogers TV, Cable 20.
Take me back to the shack, back to the start with the lightning strike. Kicking the door, more hardcore, rocking out like it's 94. Let's turn up the radio, turn off those stupid singing shows. I know where we need to go, back to the shack.
Hey, good morning. It is 10:05 on Rogers TV and 570 News. Thanks for being along. Only a high of 14 today. Going down to 0 tonight, 0, and then 18 tomorrow. It's like, make up your mind. We'll get there at some point, though. I'm sure summer will be here at some point. We have lots to get to today. What's making news this morning? Well, we're going to be talking about this guy that has now been fired by Hydro One. He was identified as being a Hydro One worker, and he hurled vulgarities at City News reporter Shauna Hunt last Sunday. If you're watching us on Rogers TV, there's the video right there. He's the one in the yellow jersey. When he comes up, that's the guy that we're talking about. He was, by the way, identified as well as a former Laurier men's soccer team member. And his name is Sean Simos. And he was a member of the university soccer team for 12 years ago, I should say, from 2003 to 2005. And in that video, he says what he and his friends were shouting, which is this trend that has been happening for the last couple of years that originated in the United States. It's this F-er right in the P thing where reporters are live on scene, broadcasting live, and somebody runs up, grabs their mic, and yells this right into the microphone. Or sometimes, I was watching some YouTube videos last night to kind of see where this all started. Sometimes it just it happens when the reporter is interviewing somebody, and then just in the middle of the interview, they'll just scream it and run away. Not funny. It really isn't funny. And it's very crude and disrespectful. Anyway, so he said that what he and his friends are shouting is, quote, effing amazing, and that he, quote, respects it. When Shauna Hunt kind of flipped the table around on the guys yesterday because she saw them lurking, right? She was interviewing a couple of fans after the TFC game and asking them about the game. And then one guy runs up and says it and runs away. And then she kind of just says, okay, whatever, this guy did that. But she says to him, hey, why would you do that? She goes back to interviewing these fans about the game. And then she's looking to the side and she sees these group of guys kind of lurking and ready to come on. And then they start walking around her, and she says, she says to the people that she's interviewing, hang on a second, hang on, and goes to confront these guys and says, well, are you guys waiting nearby here to jump on my microphone to humiliate me on television and scream this into my microphone? And then they're like entitled, right? They're like, well, yeah, why? What's the big deal? I mean, yeah, of course we are. And so the one guy says he respects it. She says, why are you doing this? He goes, well, I respect it. Anyway, he was also then asked how his mom would respond, to which he said, quote, my mom would die laughing eventually. This guy is listed on the 2014 Sunshine List as an assistant network managing engineer for Hydro One, making $106,000 annually. And as I mentioned, the utility is taking steps right now to fire him. The conversation this morning has turned into, do you deserve to be fired what you do outside of work? Should this guy have lost his job? I spoke with Stuart Rudner, Canadian employment lawyer at Rudner and McDonald in Toronto. Take a listen to this. The question, Stuart, this morning that everybody has been talking about and everybody's posting online and asking, it's on polls, on websites everywhere, is did this guy deserve to be fired for his conduct outside of work? Does what you do outside of work hours, outside of the 9 to 5, and I'm assuming he worked 9 to 5 since he was a Hydro One employee and assistant network managing engineer making $106,000 a year. He was on the Sunshine List. Does your conduct outside of the 9 to 5 have consequences, and should Hydro One be taking the steps they are right now to fire this guy?
Yeah, and this is a discussion that I'm having with clients, and I do a lot of presentations and I write a lot of papers, and more often we're discussing off-duty conduct. And I mean, the default has always been that what you do on your own time is your own business. That being said, the law has always provided that if you do something on your own time that impacts your employment relationship or your employer, that can be cause for discipline and, in some cases, dismissal. The reality is it just wasn't an issue until relatively recently, when the internet and social media in particular gave a lot of people platforms and enabled them to, in some cases, say things that impacted the reputation of their employer. And now we're seeing these all the time.
So, in other words, it's always been wrong. We just didn't have Twitter or Facebook to make it clear that it's been wrong.
Well, exactly. And one of the things I've been saying for years is that technology is wonderful for many reasons, but one of them is that it gives employees new and more interesting ways to get themselves into trouble.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of, would he have had to sign some kind of contract, some kind of code of conduct clearly outlining how he's to behave? And does that have to specify that if you're off hours, this is how we expect you to behave?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, the law, as I said, the law has always been that if you do something away from work, but it has an impact on your working relationship or on the employer, that can be cause for discipline. I mean, the employer will have an even stronger argument if the individual has signed off on some sort of code of conduct, or if there's some sort of policy in place that explicitly sets that out. But even if there isn't, the default remains that you can be disciplined for this type of conduct. So
the employer shouldn't have to work with the employee and shouldn't have to, paper trail some kind of improvement plan before they just terminate someone?
Well, and this could get into a very easily an hour-long discussion, but you can be dismissed basically in two ways in Canada. One is with cause and the other is without cause. If it's with cause, it's because the individual has done something so egregious in light of all the relevant circumstances, which includes how long the person's been working there, whether they have a past disciplinary record, what the impact is on the employer, and anything else that's relevant. You take all those factors into account. I've written a book on this, which is probably about 5 inches thick, just to give you a sense of how complicated the subject area is. But if there is just cause for dismissal, the individual gets nothing. They don't get notice, they don't get severance, they don't get anything at all. Or the employer in this type of case, for example, could say, you know what, we may or may not have cause, but we don't want this person around anymore, in which case they can essentially package them out by offering them a certain amount of severance pay. So we don't know what Hydro One did here. They may have fired him for cause and said, you're getting nothing. They may have said, we just don't want you here and we're going to give you a package. We don't know.
Do you think this would have happened if he wasn't identified as a Hydro One worker? Because, I mean, someone told me the other day, I was having a conversation with a friend, and he said, well, you didn't see that video and immediately think of Hydro One. And, you didn't immediately say, well, I'm never, going to Hydro One now because of this particular person. Like, we had no idea until someone had identified him.
Well, I think that's a really important point. I mean, if he's just some anonymous person making inappropriate comments, then it likely has no impact on the workplace. The problem, again, with the age of social media is it's pretty easy to out someone and recognize where they work. So in this case, Hydro One all of a sudden now is associated with this video. If it had never been associated with a video, if they had learned about it, they may have engaged in some discipline or at least spoken to him. But I think the fact that they reacted so harshly, but also so quickly, is due to the fact that they were concerned about the public relations impact.
You've seen the video, I'm sure. From what you've seen, is this grounds for dismissal?
Very hard to say. Like I said before, when you look at whether you have grounds for dismissal for cause, you have to look at all the relevant factors, not just what the individual did. Which is something that a lot of people have trouble getting their heads around. But, and I'll often have clients say, well, I caught an employee stealing. Surely I can fire him. And the answer, as lawyers like to say, is it depends. It really does depend on the circumstances. But I think in this case, Hydro One made a very practical decision that whether or not they had grounds to fire him for cause, they were going to get rid of him and not have him in the workplace anymore. And then they, frankly, I've worked with clients where we've made that decision that we're not going to have somebody back. And then after the fact, when we have more time, we can decide whether to take the position that we had cause or we didn't have cause and offer them a package. But in the meantime, Hydro One can now say to the world, we don't condone this type of behavior, and we acted swiftly to deal with it.
Stuart Rudner, Canadian employment lawyer, Rudner and McDonald, joining us on Rogers TV and 570 News. To me, it's pretty simple. To me, it's a public relations nightmare. And I mean, isn't that what it boils down to, really? Look, we can have the conversation whether or not what he said is sexist, whether it's it's so vulgar, or it's not that bad, or whatever, or it's just a prank. I mean, that's a conversation, all sidebar conversations. The bottom line is, I have a company, or I'm the head of a company, and you're identified as working for me, and you're saying those things that a lot of people don't like. Now it's a public relations nightmare for me.
Oh, I think that's a huge point, and that's why in the old days, not that I'm so old, but when something would happen, employers had some time to think about it, get legal advice, consider their options, and then take action. In these days, with the speed with which information travels, Hydro One, I think, had to make a very quick decision, not from a legal perspective, but from a PR perspective, and that's exactly what they did, and they'll deal with the legal issues later, I will expect.
All right. So, I mean, do you think that this is a word of caution to people? I mean, look, it does. I mean, I guess your actions outside of work do have consequences.
Well, this is something that I have been, and my colleagues have been trying to tell people for years now, that you cannot assume that what you do from away from work will not have consequences. It does, and the more public your actions are, the more likely they'll have consequences. So hopefully this case, and I mean, we're seeing something almost every week where somebody posting on Twitter or Facebook or otherwise. So hopefully all of these scenarios will get the message through that people have really got to be cautious about what they do away from work. All
right, Stuart, thanks for doing this. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Stuart Rudner right there is a Canadian employment lawyer, Rudner and McDonald in Toronto. So, if you ask me, it's a pretty clear-cut case of it simply boils down to PR. People like to say, why should it matter what I do on my own time after the 9 to 5, after it does. Bottom line, it does matter because of social media. The fact that people used to do this all the time back in the day and never got caught because there wasn't social media does, A, not make it right, and B, we live in the world of social media now, and the way you behave off work does have consequences, especially when you're lurking, ready to jump on on television and say something like F her right in the P. It does have consequences. Clearly, Hydro One taking steps to fire this guy. So my question to you, by the way, Hydro One out with a statement. Hydro One is taking steps to terminate the employee for violating our code of conduct. Respect for all people is ingrained in the code and our values. We are committed to work in an environment where discrimination or harassment of any type is met with zero tolerance. He's also being banned by MLSE for a year from all of their venues. So my question to you, do you deserve to be fired for what you do outside of work? And do you believe this guy should have lost his job? Phone lines are open. Numbers are coming your way. We'll take your calls and emails after this on Rogers TV and 570 News.
The Eric Droz Show is social and interactive. Get in touch through Twitter @Eric Droz. Email Eric at 570news.com.